Thanks, everyone. Oh, isn't God good? Are you glad you're here today? Turn to the person next to you and say, you look good today. Then grab a seat. Oh, wow. So, I'm now the pastor of Edge Church Bristol. Can you believe that? You know, if you'd have asked me 6 months ago, do you miss leading a local church? I'd have said, no, I'm really happy traveling. I blow in, I blow up, and I blow out. It's nice. But now that I'm doing it, it's like, I am loving this. It's so good. And Bristol's a nice place to visit, I want to tell you. So, you know, we're enjoying ourselves, Jackie and I, down there. So I feel very honored to be back in my old home church that I still feel very much a part of. And so glad at all the great things that are happening here. And just thanks so much for allowing me to come and preach. This is good. Okay, I have a title for my message today. I don't think I'm going to get through the whole thing, so this might be part one, and the 11:15 might be part two. Yeah. Well, you can either stay and get a double portion. You know, I mean, that's a possibility. Or you can go online in a week or so and hear part two. But here's the title of my message. It's called Children, the Present That Build the Future. Whoa, do you like that? Thank you for that enthusiastic response. Children, the present that build the future. So let's take a look at Matthew chapter 18. This is Jesus speaking to his disciples. And we'll read a text here, and then I want to unpack a few things about Jesus and his attitude towards children. And when I say children, I'm really, I'm sort of covering everyone who's kind of under 18, who's not recognized as an adult. So I'm talking about itty-bitty little babies, and I'm talking about toddlers, and I'm talking about children who now go to school, and I'm talking about teenagers who are moving into young adulthood. Is that okay? So I'm trying to cover the whole gambit here. I'll sort of unpack some things about this. So I'm basically going to try and talk a little bit about pastoring, a little bit about parenting, and a little bit about pedagogy. Oh, you're going to have to look that one up, aren't you? Which is really about how you teach and sort of the whole mindset and thinking behind that. But let's kick it off with Matthew 18. Is that okay? Here we go. At that time, the disciples come to Jesus saying, who then is greatest in the kingdom of heaven? Now, let's just stop right there for a minute. Because if somebody had come to you and just said, who's the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? I wonder how you would approach that question. Which is a great question, really. How does God view greatness? How does God understand achieving greatness or being on the journey towards greatness? And the way Jesus answered this is absolutely fascinating to me. He says this, then Jesus called a little child to him. Can you imagine that? So I'm not sure where they were at this time, the context that they're in, but the disciples are asking Jesus a question. He goes, okay, hey, can you come over here for a minute? Just invites a little child into the scenario. You know, these are 12 men, 4 of them are muscular fishermen. It's like this little kid walks into the midst and is with Jesus. And he set them in the midst of them. So I don't know, they're round in a circle. And Jesus puts this little child into the middle. Assuredly, I say to you, this is one of those old King James things that says, verily, verily, of a truth, of a truth. In other words, what I'm about to say to you can be absolutely relied upon. Assuredly, I say to you, unless you are converted and become as little children, not teenagers, little children. Did you hear this? Now, I don't know about you, but already I've got a little bit of a problem here. Because do I really want that kind of posture in my life? Do I really want to become like a little child? Because little children, they're vulnerable, they're dependent, but they have many other qualities too. They're unbelievably creative and unbelievably trusting. And Jesus says, you've got to be converted. It's so interesting. The Greek word there, converted, is this word strepho. It literally means to turn. And so when Peter denied Jesus, it said Jesus turned and looked at him. And they made eye contact. And then Peter remembered the words of Jesus. It says he went out and wept bitterly. Jesus literally turned. And so this Greek word here is all about adjusting your focus. It's about turning in such a way that what you see becomes different. And that's what Jesus is doing here. It's a powerful illustration to these disciples who want to be great. They want to achieve great things for God. And Jesus is saying, well, unless you change your focus in life, there's no way that's going to happen. And that focus, that change, that shift is about becoming something that is counterintuitive. Now, Paul said it like this when he wrote to the Corinthian church. He said, look, when it comes to malice, be children. When it comes to understanding, be grown up, be men. And so there's a sense in which we need to mature and we need to gain understanding and we need to have a discerning perspective on life. But there's an other side to it where we need to remain in our posture and in our attitude like children. Okay, let's go on with this. Shifting your focus. You know, Paul, he got so frustrated with the Jewish people in Acts 13:46. He said, look, if you don't want my message, it's okay. We turn and we go to the Gentiles. He shifted his focus. Why? Because there was no response here. And so very often we have to make a decision. Where's our focus going to be? Well, the focus has to be where there's responsiveness. Where's the main responsiveness? It's children. 80% of people get saved before they're 18 years of age. Think about that. And that's why in Equippers, we have a slight obsession with the next generation. That's why the music style is for the next generation. It's not about you. People come to church and say, oh, I didn't really enjoy the worship, you know. It's just a bit too bouncy for me, you know. It's just not really me. Well, who's in the center of that world? As if worship was ever about you. Too tough. Aren't you glad I'm just a visiting speaker? It's like, you'll recover later, don't worry. It's like, you know what, something, we have 6 children. And we have 4 grandchildren. So, we're enjoying this season of life. Let me say something to you as big people. Your behavior in church is a learned behavior. What you think is your preference has nothing to do with your real preference. It has everything to do with how you were schooled and taught how to respond in church. Because if you take a whole group of children and you put music on, just watch what happens. They move. They move. They don't say, oh, we don't do that here. They don't say that to one another. They encourage one another. There's a freedom with kids. But what we've learned to do is, like our whole education system, I have a few things to say about that. You know, our entire education system around the world, by the way, not just in the UK, is very much come out of the Industrial Revolution. And it's very much about getting kids to sit down and listen. And that's a very tough thing if you're a kid who's got ADHD. Sitting down and listening. And basically what we do is we tell kids to sit down and we educate them from the neck up. And we put stuff into their heads. And you need to know this. And then all the kids who've got really good memories, we sort of say, well, you're the bright ones. And the kids who are kinesthetic learners, we say, well, you know, you have a bit of a problem. Maybe you need to take this medication. And it's not a great way of nurturing children. And Jesus says, he says, this is talking about greatness in the kingdom. Like if you want to have impact in the kingdom of God, you have to be converted. You have to turn, you have to shift your focus like Jesus did. And he says this, well, unless you do that, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven. Does that sound heavy to you? You can't be stubborn about this. Whoever receives one little child like this, and they're there, he's there in front of them, like this, receives me. Whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me. Now, let's stop right there. Who believe in me. Jesus didn't say that they get converted. He said the most natural thing for a child to do is to believe in me. In other words, children are not atheists when they're children. They learn to become atheists later on in life. And why do they become atheists? Well, here's what usually happens. When you're growing up as a child, you have a passion for truth. What do you do, Mum? What do you do, Dad? Why did you marry Dad? They have 1,000 questions. Do you know the average 40-year-old asks over 80 questions a day? Think about that. Lots of questions, wanting to know stuff. And what is it? It's this inquiring mind. Now, here's what happens. If you start to lie to a child, very soon they discover the lie. And what you've taught them then is, you can't trust me. And so children learn that some people can't be trusted. Now, sometimes that's a good thing. It's a protective thing. But if the disposition is the most important people in my world can't be trusted, then it develops a cynicism and an unbelief. And that can get very deep-rooted in children. And it's, I had a mother who sort of believed, it's okay to lie if you're protecting people. That's a tricky philosophy in life to kind of live out. At the age of 65, my brother and I discovered that we have two different fathers. That was a little bit of a shock. A little bit of a process we had to go through there. Whatever you do, don't go on MyHeritage DNA and do a test unless you're prepared for an outcome you didn't plan on. And it's like, woo, Mum, it would have been useful to know that. It's a miracle we're believers, actually. So let's go back to Jesus. Whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me, children naturally believe. You tell a child something, they believe you. It's a disposition of heart that they have. And it's wonderful. And that means we have to steward that and be truthful with them. And sometimes rather than lie to a child, the best thing to say to them is, you know what, when you're a little bit older, I'd love to talk to you about this. But it's not appropriate for me to talk to you about it now. I just need to protect you. But there will be a time where we can talk about this. Do you get that? So I'm not talking about giving heavy burdens on children they're not ready to bear. But let's stay with Jesus for a minute. If you cause one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it would be better for him if a millstone were hung around his neck and he were drowned in the depth of the sea. This is one of the heaviest things Jesus ever says to any of his disciples. It's one of the heaviest things. In other words, we're there to create stepping stones for children, not stumbling blocks. And so how do we create stepping stones? Well, there has to be a shift in focus. There has to be a sense of priority. I can honestly stand here and tell you that having 6 kids was one of the greatest joys of my life. People used to say to me, you're crazy. 6? Oh, I'm just coping with 1. And there's a toughness in the beginning. There's a pressure in the beginning. But I want to tell you, it's been unbelievably joyful. And children are so incredibly good at just challenging you sometimes, challenging your way of being, challenging your thinking. They certainly challenge your patience. Sometimes we think that God puts things in us like we're a simple funnel and he pours it in. Wouldn't that be lovely if that were true? But that's not how it works. God works through the nature of relationships. And so Jesus is saying here, don't cause little ones to stumble. I think we're causing little ones to stumble all the time in the world today. And I think as church, we need to model something differently. I was talking to Roger Forster one time. This was over 30 years ago. And I was a new senior pastor of a church. And so I was preaching twice on Sunday every single week. And I was asking him some keys to communicating well with people. And I said, how do you train your preachers in Ichthus? Ichthus Christian Fellowship at that time was probably the largest church in London. They were the first church to break 1,000 anyway. And I was talking to Roger, how do you train your people? And he said, oh, that's very simple. We put them in our Sunday school program. And I said, really? I said, why do you do that? He said this to me. If you cannot communicate with an 8-year-old, you can't communicate with anybody. I thought, that's good. That's really good. You know, over the years, you wouldn't believe how many people will come into a church like ours. And one of the first things they tell me after a few weeks is, you know, the Lord's really used me in preaching and teaching, just in case. I said, oh, that's fantastic. We have a need in our Sunday school. We have a need in our kids program. Oh, no. I don't. Oh, really? It's just a great way of testing people. You know, when I was in my 30s and I was pastoring a church and a growing church, I was a chaplain to our local Christian school. And 2 to 3 times a week, I did chapel. And the kids loved it when I did chapel. I'm telling you, they loved it. Why? Because I loved it. It's like, you know, when you're with children, you kind of get to be more playful because kids love that. And here's Jesus here. He says this, woe to the world because of offenses. Offenses must come, but woe to the man through whom the offense comes. In other words, Jesus is saying this, look, offenses are going to happen in the world, but here's what we need to make sure. Don't you be a channel for the offense. Don't you be the one who causes the offense. You be the one who creates stepping stones, not stumbling blocks. And then jumping down to verse 10, he says this, take heed that you do not despise one of these little ones. This is all about greatness in the kingdom. Listen, children are not an inconvenience. Children are not a pain. Children are a blessing and they are a gift. And that's the attitude that we have to have, both personally and individually, but corporately as a church. Come on. People say to me, how did you manage with 6 kids in a 3-bedroom house? I said, it's easy. Rack them and stack them. Somebody came to visit our house one time. We were living in a 3-bedroom house at that time. And they went in the bedroom, and it was a small box room, actually. And they went in there, and they said, wow, you've got 4-foot beds. And we had 4-foot bunk beds, 4 foot long. How many of you know most bunk beds are 6 foot? But we couldn't get 6-foot bunk beds in that room. It was a box room. So we got 4-foot bunk beds. Do you know how they said, where did you get those from? I said, I bought secondhand 6-foot bunk beds and cut them down. Well, what did you do with the mattress? We sawed it. We made it work. You make it work. You find a way. Then eventually we converted the loft, you know, and made room in all other kinds of ways. We adjusted our lives for the sake of our family. Do you get that? We made all kinds of sacrifices to do that. Do you know, when I got saved, I was saved in the context of Americans leading the church, and they were all teetotalers. So for 7 years, I didn't drink any alcohol. My mother's Italian. Can you imagine how hard that was? That was a sacrifice for me, believe me. And then later on, you know, when I got converted, I did drink. Just the way the Italians do, not getting drunk, not overdoing it, just wine with a meal. That's how we like to do it in Italy. It's just very nice, very social, very family. But here's something. Because we had kids and we had a growing family, I made a decision. My father used to go out every week, every Sunday, and have way too much to drink down the pub every Sunday. He wasn't a believer at the time. And he was smoking 60 cigarettes a day. And lots of money was going on those 2 pleasures. And I don't begrudge him doing that, but I just decided as a father, you know what? Well, I don't smoke anyway, but I'm not going to drink. I'm not going to buy any bottles of wine. I'm going to pray that I get gifted wine. So you need to know that for almost 12 years as a father, I didn't buy 1 bottle of wine. Why? because we had kids. And I didn't want my kids to lack anything. And so I've changed my focus of where I purchase things. And we get really lovely bottles of wine occasionally. I'm like, would you like a bottle? Yes, I rather would. Thank you. Thank you. But where's the focus? Let me give you some things really quickly. We've got time. We're good. Number one, here's about children. Here's what Psalm 127 says. It says, they are a reward and an inheritance. They are a reward and an inheritance. Listen, you could leave houses and cars behind, but it's way better if you leave children. Now, let me say this. I know there are some people who can't have kids. I understand that. When I talk about having children, I'm not just talking about having biological children. I have met many, many fine people who are spiritual mothers and spiritual fathers, and I have met some amazing couples who've actually adopted kids, and I include you in everything I'm saying today. Just to be really clear, if you're fostering, if you're adopting, or you're a spiritual parent today, you are having an amazing influence right where you are. And if you're a single parent, I take my hat off to you. You are doing an incredible job. And I believe in the church, we have spiritual mothers and spiritual fathers to help you as a single parent. So when I left home and went to Bible college, it did not go well with my parents. It was a season in my life where my father didn't talk to me virtually for 3 years. But I had a spiritual father in the church I went to. He nurtured me, he helped me, he invested in me, and I had an amazing time until my own father and I could reconcile and really find each other again. Do you get that? So here's what Psalm 127, behold, children are a heritage from the Lord. Now in England, we love heritage. We even have a place called English Heritage, where we protect certain places in the UK, where we protect certain houses, where we protect certain countrysides. And it's called English Heritage. Why? In other words, this is protected so that the next generation can enjoy what we enjoyed. And God is saying, you want to know what my heritage is? It's children. And it says here in Psalm 127, happy is the man who has his quiver full. Not, oh my God, not another child. It's like, thank you, Lord, more inheritance. Do you get this? Now, I know there are some crazy parents out there who just don't do a great job, but that's another issue. Children are a heritage from the Lord, the fruit of the womb, a reward. How about that? That's a reward. That's a blessing. Like arrows in the hand of a warrior are the children of one's youth. And I always say to people, why are you waiting to have kids? Just get on with it. Get on with it. I was 25 when I became a father. I was clueless at 25. Just some of the crazy things. But what do? Well, children help you mature. Because suddenly you have to turn, you have to strefo, you have to focus differently on life, you have to accept responsibility in a new way. And it's one of the greatest ways of growing up. You know, we live with a generation today who don't want to grow up. It's the Peter Pan syndrome. You know, I just want my life, I want to live first, I want to do this, I want to do that. Well, do you want to do that, or do you want to be great in the kingdom? Change your focus. Change your focus. So they are a reward and an inheritance. It says here, he shall not be put to shame when he speaks with his enemies at the gate. Why? Because he's raised the future. He's raised a future inheritance. Who can fight? So what value do we place on children? I have a 90-second video I want to show you. Check this out.
If you could have dinner with anyone, living or dead, who would you choose?
Kylie Minogue.
Oh. Marilyn Monroe.
Oh, God, I wouldn't have a clue.
I know, straight up. Paul Hogan.
Kim Kardashian.
No.
I'd like to have dinner with Justin Bieber.
What? He's not coming to my house.
I'd have Bob Hawke.
Dave Hughes.
Barry Humphries.
Jimi Hendrix.
People who have made a difference in the world, maybe Nelson Mandela at the dinner table. I don't know what he's going to say. I'm scared.
If you could have dinner with anyone in the world, who would you choose?
Probably our whole family, like our whole extended family.
Mum and Dad. Mum and Dad. Does it have to be a celebrity? Could it be family?
We love it. We talk about how school is. We ask Mum and Dad how their day was.
Family.
Yeah, Mum and Dad.
Family. Who would you like to have dinner with? They just want to be with us while they're eating food, which is pretty cool.
They see us above everything. I'm gonna get.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bit of a message in it for me.
Yeah.
Does that impact you the way it impacted me? I cried for 10 minutes after I saw that video. I was so deeply moved. I was deeply moved because as adults, we think one way. And then you just ask kids, what is it they want? And it's like, they want you. And you know, if you're a teacher, you know, I was at a very rough school, Rectory Secondary Modern School. I could take you there in Hampton. My first day at secondary school, my very first day, 12 years of age, and there was a fight going on between a teacher and a sixth former. The sixth former was 6'1". And the teachers were on one side cheering the teacher, and the students were on one side. And they were going at it. Like they were going at it. And I was 12 years of age witnessing this, and I was petrified. I thought, where have I come to? What is this? And it was a really rough school, and it was for me, it was all about surviving. It was like, you know, avoiding getting beaten up and avoiding getting picked on and bullied, which happened in the very first year of my school, just being picked on all the time. And then I developed just a really bad attitude in that time because I felt like a victim and I felt resentful. And I thought, I don't know how to deal with this. And so I became a troublemaker. And in my first year of school, I got the cane every week for the first 6 months. That was back in the day, half a century ago. And it hardened me. It didn't soften me, it hardened me. It gave me an attitude towards life and towards teachers and towards learning. And I remember an English teacher, I'll never forget him. David Hudson was his name. And I was 15 years of age, and he pulled me into his office. He wasn't even my teacher. And because I was a troublemaker, they put me in the lowest class, you know, with all the kids who just weren't that bright, really. And I remember David Hudson, and he said, I've read some of your papers recently. One of the other teachers gave it to me. He said, you wrote an English paper. And I said, oh yeah, I remember that. He said, why is somebody who's as intelligent as you behaving the way you do? And as a 15-year-old kid, I looked at him and I said, because nobody expects me to be any differently. And then he looked at me and he said, well, I do. He said, I'd like to pull you into my class. So I went from like the bottom stream to the top stream because of this man. And it was weird because I lost all my friends that I was with, and then all the new people that I was with knew I'd been transferred, and they didn't like that. So I kind of lost every friend at that time, but I didn't care because suddenly somebody believed in me. And it was a teacher. And it had a profound impact on my learning. Do you know, I was the first guy who left that school, Rectory Secondary Modern, who went to university. I was the first student who ever did that. Now, other people went to teacher training college, other people went to polytechnics, which was kind of the B-grade university back in those days. But I was the first who actually went to a credible university, to Manchester University. Why? Because a teacher who believed in me. And I want to say to us this morning, come on, there's an inheritance, there's a heritage here. There's something that needs to be protected, that needs to be watched over, that needs to be nurtured. And it's children. And every single one of us has an influence, whether they're your own children or whether you're an uncle or whether you're a caregiver or whatever it is, there's something that you can do. But what value do you place in it? Because kids place value on people who love them and take time with them. And so I love it when we're going to have, for the very first time this summer, all of our kids and grandchildren together in like 5 or 6 years. Because we have a son who lives in America now and is married to an American. We have a daughter who's married to a doctor who's a Dane, and they live in Denmark. And we've got another one who's deserting us and going to Birmingham for some reason. Because of a kingdom priority, by the way, which we celebrate. We're not resentful about that. We celebrate that. But we're going to have a gathering. And you know what? It's going to be tribal. And it's going to be chaotic. And thank God I got a son-in-law called Jesus. And thank God he's a chef. He's going to be very busy over this summer, I can tell you. Barbecues out there. It's going to be fantastic. And it will be chaotic. But I'm so looking forward to it. Because they want to be with us and we want to be with them. And as God's people, we're called the family of God. When you're born into the kingdom, the first thing that happens is the Holy Spirit cries in your heart in Galatians 4:6, Abba, Father, we are now joined. We've been adopted into God's family. God, who sent forth his Son, has sent forth the Spirit of his Son into your hearts. We've received the Spirit of adoption. So let's adopt kids. And I don't mean literally, well, maybe I do. I don't just mean legally adopt them. I mean, let's adopt them in our heart. Let's be people who say, I want to be great in the kingdom. I'm not going to just exclude. The disciples said, people brought in Matthew 19, the little children, listen to this. The little children were brought to him, to Jesus, Matthew 19:13, that he might put his hands on them and pray. They were just lining up, oh, Jesus, can you just touch him and pray? And the disciples are crowd control. No, he's too important. He's too busy to do that. Well, how did Jesus respond? The disciples rebuked them, but Jesus said, let the little children come to me. And do not forbid them, for of such is the kingdom of heaven. And he laid his hands on them and departed from there. I love that. He blessed them. It's like, can you imagine that? This is Jesus. Jesus. If you want to know what your heart is truly like, spend time with children and your heart will be revealed. If you're impatient, that'll come. Kids will bring that out of you. Yeah. You think you're too important? Kids will bring that out in you. And you know what? Kids call it out. Kids, I've told this story about Anna Marie when I think she was 10. I was really trying to work it out how old she was. I think she was 10. Anna is the one never afraid to share her opinion. Watch out. And she was kicking off one day and I shouted at her, you know, as parents do occasionally. And she went running to her bedroom, and I got that look from the wife. You know the look? And I thought, instant conviction. I said, yeah, I know, I was wrong. I shouted, shouldn't have shouted. I'm just going to calm down and I'll make it right. And I went into my Zen mode. Peace, bad thoughts. Peace, bad thoughts. Just trying to get myself calm, in a good place, to be a good dad, to go and apologize to my daughter. I went up to the bedroom, knocked on the door. She kept me waiting. It's like, how many of you know when a child keeps you waiting, the temperature starts to go back up again? You know that one? It's like, I'm here to say sorry, and you're keeping me waiting? What's going on? And then eventually she opened the door, and I walked in I had my speech prepared. I was like the prodigal son. You know how we prepared a speech? I will go to my father, and I will say. But it was reversed. I will go to my daughter and I will say. I had it all rehearsed in my head. And she goes like this. I walk through the door. She goes like that. Put up her hand. 10-year-old kid. And she said, Daddy, before you say anything, I'd like to say something. I thought, oh dear. I said, okay, what do you want to say? She said, I know what I did was wrong, but do you think you handled that in the most mature way possible? How does a 10-year-old kid come up with that? And you know, have you seen Alice in Wonderland? You know where she shrinks and everything around her gets bigger? That's what happened to me. I was like standing there in front of a 10-year-old and I was shrinking. I was getting smaller and smaller and smaller and she was getting bigger and bigger and bigger. You know, it was just this subjective experience I was going through. And I said, no, you're perfectly right. I did not handle that in the most mature way possible. And then she looked at me and she said, well, Daddy, have you learned an important lesson from this experience? Now I'm about this high. Like I am feeling so small and so rebuked and so chastised. And no, darling, I did not handle that in a very mature way at all. And I think I've learned a very important lesson. And then she looked at me and she said, that's okay, Daddy, I love you. Hugged on. I felt, then I grew again. My point is this. Children are the now, the present, who build the future. But the only way they can effectively build the future is if we build them. And we build them by loving them and nurturing them. We build them by investing in them and seeing them as important. And what every parent on that screen that we watched suddenly realized is, we'd like to sit down with this person. We'd like to sit down with that. We'd love to talk to this person. And the kids just say, can we have family? And I don't know about you, but it moves me. It does something in here. And I know some of us have come from dysfunctional families and we've come from bad family backgrounds. I get that. I get that happens sometimes. But you know, we're part of the family of God. We're part of the church of the living God. And God wants us to nurture. Let me give you some advice. Here's what it says in Ephesians 6:4. It says, fathers, don't provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and the instruction of the Lord. And then Colossians 3:21 is very similar. It says, fathers, do not provoke your children lest they become discouraged. I think we're not meant to be harsh with kids. We're not meant to be provocative. We're not meant to pick a fight. We're meant to encourage them. How do you do that? I think you do it by creating environments. You create an environment. You know what Jackie and I have always tried to do in our home? We've tried to create an environment where the kids want to be there. They actually like being with us because we genuinely like them. We genuinely want their success. We genuinely want to invest in them. We genuinely want to support them. And I've taken that attitude through every arena of church life I've been involved with. When I've been involved in kids ministry or I've been involved in teenagers. And kids today, especially teenagers, they're going through unbelievable pressures. Unbelievable pressures. And we need to be a church that accepts them and allows them to go through a degree of naughtiness. Do you know what I'm saying by that? Listen, one of the greatest gifts you can ever give your children who are transitioning into adulthood, and that begins around about 14, believe me. It begins quite young. They start thinking very independently. They start doing self-reflection. But they're very confused because they're going through all kinds of hormonal stuff and all kinds of relationship stuff. And they just need permission to sometimes get it wrong. And you know, we live in an education system where we penalize you for getting wrong, making a mistake. And you know what I love about kids is they don't mind having a go. They don't mind having a go. There's a wonderful story about a 6-year-old girl in our class, and the teacher came up to her and said, oh, what are you drawing? She wasn't interested in anything, but she was interested in art. And the teacher was surprised. This kid doesn't like learning, but in the art lesson, she just loved doing art. And she said, well, what are you doing? She said, well, I'm drawing a picture of God. And the teacher said to her, but nobody knows what God looks like. And the 6-year-old looked at her and she said, well, when I finish this picture, they will. And you know what I love about that? Is that kids are not afraid to have a go. They're not afraid. I remember teaching my son. He was 3 years old to ride a bike, and he had an older sister who was like 5, and she had stabilizers. And my son said, "Oh, take the stabilizers off, Daddy. I want to ride on my own." And he was just one of those people who could just do anything. So I took the stabilizers off, and sure enough, this 3-year-old kid was riding up and down. And his older sister looked at that and said, "My brother is not going to learn to ride a bike before me." My younger brother, so she said, "Daddy, I'm going to ride the bike." And I thought, oh no, this could not end well. So I'm running behind, sort of stable, and then off she went. She rode the bike the same day. And it's like, wow. They are not afraid to have a go. But you know what? We become so cautious, and we don't want anybody to make mistakes. And how many of you know kids embarrass you all the time as parents? Isn't it wonderful when your kids visit someone's home and you're praying, aren't you? It's like, God, don't let them behave like they do at home. You ever prayed that prayer? Am I the only one in the room? And then you talk to people afterwards and they say, wow, your kids are so polite. They're so thoughtful. And you sort of think to yourself, really? And then you sort of have hope. You have hope because you think, well, we did do something right. And then they come home and say, where's this and where's that? And it's like, oh, okay, that was short-lived. But you've got to give kids permission to find their way. And it can't always be about rules, and it can't always be about strictness. There's got to be encouragement in it. So when kids fail, it's not the end of the world. They just get back on the bike and they try again. Some years ago, 25 years ago, the educational system shifted slightly, and we introduced what were called National Vocational Qualifications, NVQs they were called at the time. I became an NVQ assessor. And there's many things you could criticize about that program, but one of the things I really loved about this is that when you had an assessment for your qualification, you were either competent or not yet competent. There was no such thing as competent and incompetent. Incompetent was not an outcome. That language was deleted. It was simply not yet competent. In other words, more learning needs to be done, and you can do it. And let's assess this again in the future. And I love that. And what would happen if in our church and in our families and in our schools and in our Sunday schools and in our youth ministries, we were saying to people, yeah, you've got it, or you haven't quite got it yet. But I'd love to work with you till you do. And what would happen if in our lives we had that attitude in the kingdom? That we're still learning, but we're not afraid of making mistakes. We're not afraid of trusting people. We're not afraid of giving them a go. I had a young youth pastor at one time who booked a summer camp, and he did it very ambitiously. We had a youth ministry of about 35 teenagers at the time, and he booked a camp for 100. I said, you're believing for 2/3 more to come? He said, yeah. And then as we approached, I think we got 50, and we were potentially going to lose £2,000 as a church. And one of the other leaders came to me and said, you've made a big mistake appointing that guy. You've made a big mistake letting him do that. We need to put more rules in place. We need to be stricter. And I said to him, I promise you that is the very thing I will not do. Because if I do that, I'm going to discourage him, and I'm going to send a message that I don't trust him, and that he needs to have more rules in his life, and that's not what he needs. He learned an important lesson. And I don't care if as a church it costs us £2,000. I don't care. I will not discourage him, and I will not do that. You know why? Because I've learned how to encourage people over years. And the great thing is we did get the money back. We didn't lose it. But I wasn't going to cave into that kind of pressure. Hey, what kind of investment are you prepared to make? in kids in the next generation. Weren't you excited by what Sam was saying? What's happening with this school? Unstoppable. I was wondering where the E was, all the teachers in the room. But apparently that little thing at the end is the E, because it's unstoppable. I knew this would be a 2-part series. I'm going to pick this up in the second service, but let me read this to you. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Deuteronomy 6:4. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. And these words that I command you today shall be in your heart. We all know that scripture because Jesus quotes it, but listen what it goes on to say. You shall teach them diligently to your children. You shall talk with them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, and when you lie down and when you rise. Kids are meant to see how much you love God, and it will provoke them to ask questions. I'll unpack that more in the second service. Stand to your feet. Hey, if you're here this morning and you realize, having heard this message, you need to turn. You need a bit of a strepho in your life. There needs to be a shift of focus. I want to speak particularly to the men. Listen, I understand what it means to be career-minded. I understand what it means to make your mark and to be successful in the workplace. I do. You want to be a good provider for your family. I honor that. But don't do that at the expense of investing in your children and in the next generation. And from welcoming others who perhaps need you to be a spiritual father to them. Don't do it at that expense. Create a boundary, because your kids want you and need you way more than you realize. And I thought when they leave home, that'll be it, you know. Hasta la vista. It's not true. They keep needing encouragement. They keep wanting connection. If this touches your heart, I want to pray for you. Put your hand right here if you want God to do something in your life in this new season. Father, every single person from the left to the right, from the front to the back, who's just asking for grace right now, I thank you. It's never too late. I thank you that we can learn important lessons from life, from our own mistakes. And I thank you that like children, we can become like little children, not afraid to do it again, not afraid to try again, not afraid to make a mistake along the way of becoming competent, of becoming better. And I thank you that none of us in this room are born great fathers and great mothers, but we're made that. Just as you make disciples, you make great mums, you make great dads, you make great brothers, you make great sisters, you make great uncles, you make great aunts. And we have the opportunity to make great children. And I pray that this church is known for a church that welcomes families, that takes them in, that rebuilds them, and that they become strong, and that they have an impact in the world. And I pray for every person reaching out for grace this morning, Father, that your abundance of grace would be towards us today. I pray for your blessing in the name of Jesus.